Hello and what is up, my friends? Thunderbob here, and tonight we're going to be checking out a game that I recently completed, Batman Arkham Shadow. I wanted to do a quick review after finishing the game and giving my final thoughts. Overall, I really enjoyed the game. This is a true Arkham game and perhaps the game that most made me feel, not like I was controlling a character, but that I was actually Batman. The setup for this game involves a new villain named the Rat King, who has promised a day of reckoning, and Batman is on his trail to prevent the destruction of Gotham. The first third or so of the game has you following a pretty linear path across some familiar Gotham sites, until you realize to stop this enemy you need to infiltrate his gang at the Blackgate prison. The rest of the game has you alternating between daytime activities, where you play as Matches, a common criminal whose persona you use to infiltrate the prison, and nights where you sneak out of your cell and prowl the prison as Batman. This really is an Arkham game, but it really nails the feel of that original game, Arkham Asylum, more so than the later games. It's much more of a Metroidvania with small environments than later games which had those huge open worlds with the full Gotham to explore. Initially it feels very linear as you make your way across very narrowly defined paths, but soon the entire prison is unlocked and there's a ton of exploration and secrets to find along the way.
I've got the explosive gel.
Blackgate Prison reminds me a lot of that original Arkham Asylum game. It's a main set piece of the majority of the game that slowly unlocks as you progress through the game. Tons to explore and find, though it does feel a little bit more confined in that game and a little bit more narrow in its scope. The combat, while it controls very differently from those original games, still evokes that same feeling, and nearly every mechanic and move has been translated to VR seamlessly here. You make a fist and punch towards an enemy and Batman will lunge across the space to them. You get to punch and dodge and stun. You can leap over enemies to disarm them from behind. You have to physically dodge from knife-wielding enemies. You don't get a ton of freedom in how you actually punch, and you really have to follow these on-screen prompts to succeed. But once you understand the flow, it's really fun and quite fluid. You also have a ton of gadgets at your disposal, both for puzzle solving and also for combat, including the Bat Claw, Batarang, stun pellets, and shot gloves. Traversing the environment is fun and really makes you feel like Batman, as your shadow appears below you as you glide to your next destination. You also have a lot of stealth options that feel ripped right out of the original game. It is incredibly satisfying and fun to bounce from statue to statue, avoiding detection, swoop down and disable an enemy, then grapple to the other side of the arena. And honestly, this area of the game feels most directly ripped from those classic Arkham games. As Batman, you also do a lot of detective work, which is ripped out of those classic games. Though sometimes it's a little bit frustrating here. You really need to look at things from a very particular angle, and sometimes it wants you to piece together this puzzle in a very, very specific way. And I found, like, I knew what it wanted me to do, but I wasn't standing in the exact same spot. When it does come together and work, when you're piecing together these violent encounters, it's fun, but there is some frustration to get it right. I feel the story here is quite strong, and it's one of my favorite parts of the game. It fills in the gap between Arkham Origins and Arkham Asylum. You're a Batman who's not quite as new to the gig as the Origins Batman, but you're not the grizzled veteran of the later games. You still have a lot of rage, and part of the story here is coming to terms with Batman's past and his anger. I was actually surprised by the amount of ground the game covers from a story perspective. You get to interact with a lot of characters before they've completely evolved into the villains they become later, like Harley, Scarecrow, Harvey Dent, not to mention many others. And it really humanizes these characters and provides a lot of needed history and backstory. The main story motivation here is hunting down the Rat King, but at times it gets overshadowed by other more interesting elements of the story for me. Perhaps my favorite addition here is the backstory for Harvey Dent. Between major story moments, you get these cutscenes of Bruce and Harvey Dent as children, all the way into young adulthood. And it turns out after his parents' death, that they became good friends, almost brother-like. The story here is really the driving emotional force for the entire game, and it leads us to an incredible final act, and a well-earned ending that's both satisfying and thought-provoking. Next, let's talk about the graphics and the sound. This is a great-looking game for a standalone Quest 3 game, and I can't help but add that caveat And imagine what this game might look like running on my much more powerful computer. The graphics do an admirable job and are believable, if a bit more cartoony than the flat screen cousins. I would say it looks better than Arkham Asylum, but not quite up to the standard of Arkham City or Knight. The environments are also much smaller and feel a bit held back by the limited hardware. The performance is good, though I did run into a few bugs during my playthrough. Nothing completely game-breaking, but there were a few times where I needed to restart the game. The music and sound effects all sound crisp and appropriate for the game.
Security is locked.
With the death of Kevin Conroy, I was worried about the voice of Batman, but Roger Craig Smith does an admirable job here, and it makes sense as he voiced the younger Batman in Arkham Origins. And overall, the voice cast does a really good job here. There are a few areas I feel like the game could be improved if they do go for a sequel. I feel like there's a lack of interesting boss fights. The series is known for the huge rogue gallery and the intense fights with those enemies, and this game really drops the ball in that area. There are a few big fights, but very few against any real superpowered villains or metahumans. I feel like a fight against a large enemy, think something like Sandman from Spider-Man 2, could be incredible in VR with the mechanics of this game. Also, while you run into a decent number of classic Batman characters, by the end I can't help but compare it to the huge cast of the previous games and feel a little bit cheated. There are a few interesting surprises here, and the limited cast that is here really gets the time to shine, but I do hope that if they follow up, that they're a little bit more ambitious with who they pull from the comics. Lastly, a larger world would be very welcome. I don't need a fully explorable Gotham City, but I hope they evolve from the single location to add a few additional hubs that allow more exploration. Blockade does open up a bit, but you end up crossing the same few locations dozens of times, and adding a few areas away from the prison would have really helped with the pacing in the back half of the game. So, final thoughts. This is an amazing Batman game that totally lives up to the promise of Arkham Asylum, while falling a little bit short of the sequels. The combat, the stealth, the story are all very well done, though I think they could have been a bit more ambitious with some of the boss fights, the size of the cast here, and the size of the overall world. This is by far my favorite VR game of the year, and perhaps the best VR game I've played since Half-Life Alyx, and I can totally recommend it if you have a Quest 3. So I'll end it there. I do want to thank you for watching. If you enjoy what I do here, please like, subscribe, drop me a comment with any thoughts, and just have a great night, everybody.